Have you ever thought about a system so perfectly engineered to divide people that the word for it literally means separation? Well, that system was apartheid in South Africa. It was one of the most brutal forms of social engineering in the 20th century. For almost 50 years, it was the law of the land, and believe me, its echoes are still felt all over the world today.
The name really tells you everything you need to know. Apartheid. It's an Afrikaans word, and it literally means separation. And from 1948 all the way to 1994, this wasn't just some social prejudice, it was the law. A system that was meticulously, deliberately crafted to turn an entire nation against itself.
So, how did something like this become official policy? Well, it all kicks off in 1948. The far-right National Party wins the general election, and their whole platform was built on the idea of white supremacy. Their victory wasn't just a political shift, it was the beginning of formal, legal apartheid.
At its core, the entire system of apartheid was built on one single devastating idea: racial classification. The government literally divided the whole population into four main groups: white, black, colored, and Indian. And that label, which was stamped right onto your identity documents, would control everything about your life: where you could live, who you were allowed to marry, and what kind of future you could even dream of.
You know, this system of classification wasn't just some abstract thing on paper. Oh no, it became the crushing reality of daily life, enforced by hundreds of laws that turned the country into this tangled, suffocating web of racial restrictions.
One of the very first laws they passed was the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act of 1949, and this went way beyond just social norms. This was about legislating love itself. They were making control over personal relationships a cornerstone of the entire regime.
The thinking behind this law was just incredibly stark. It flat-out banned marriages between white and non-white people. And the reason they gave? They said it was to protect the so-called purity of the white race. So you see, this wasn't just about keeping people apart. It was a policy built on this rigid belief in a racial hierarchy. Okay, so after controlling relationships, the regime turned its attention to controlling physical space. And they did this through two policies that were deeply connected: the creation of these things called bantustans and the enforcement of incredibly strict pass laws.
And here's where you really see the mechanics of control in action. The black majority was forced into these so-called homelands, or Bantustans, which were basically underdeveloped, isolated territories. If you wanted to enter a city, a white area, even just for work, you had to carry a passbook. And if you were caught without it, you'd be arrested on the spot. It was essentially a system of internal passports designed to control the movement of the country's own citizens.
But you know, a system this oppressive is always going to create resistance. It's inevitable. The fight against apartheid was long, it was brutal, and it eventually came to be symbolized by one absolutely towering figure: Nelson Mandela. This timeline really puts the decades of struggle into perspective. It starts way back in 1912 with the founding of the ANC. But a massive turning point came in 1960 with the Sharpeville Massacre. Police opened fire on peaceful protesters and killed 69 people. That event right there is what pushed the movement towards armed resistance. Just 2 years later, its leader, Nelson Mandela, was arrested. And it would be decades before President F.W. de Klerk finally began to dismantle the system in 1990, which led to those historic elections in 1994. 27 years. Just let that sink in. That's how long Nelson Mandela was in prison. For nearly 3 decades, from behind bars, he became the world's most famous political prisoner, and really the global symbol for the fight for freedom.
And this quote from Mandela, it just gets right to the heart of what the movement was all about. He knew their fight was bigger than just getting rid of one set of racist laws. It was a universal struggle, a fight for the basic recognition of human dignity for everyone.
So when South Africa finally held its first truly democratic elections in 1994, the result was a crystal-clear mandate for change. Just look at this table. The ANC, Mandela's party, got an incredible 94% of its support from the black community. It was a unified, absolutely powerful message.
But here's where things get complicated. The architects of apartheid, the National Party, they didn't just vanish. They still got almost 4 million votes, and they actually won a majority among white, colored, and Indian voters. It's a really stark reminder of just how complex and divided the country still was, even in this incredible moment of victory. But the ANC's victory wasn't just won on the streets of South Africa. For decades, there was a whole other front in the war against apartheid, and it was being fought on the world stage as international pressure really started to build.
Slowly but surely, the international community basically built a wall of isolation around South Africa. Economic sanctions started to cripple its economy. Arms embargoes weakened its military. Their athletes were banned from the Olympics, and famous musicians refused to play there. The country was even kicked out of international organizations, turning it, for all intents and purposes, into a pariah state.
So what is the legacy of this whole system? And how does its long shadow still stretch into our world today? Let's take a look at how the nation changed and the conversations it sparked that are still going on.
I mean, the transformation was just night and day. Before 1994, South Africa was an outcast. After 1994, under Mandela, it emerged as the Rainbow Nation, jumping back onto the world stage with a brand new foreign policy centered on human rights and peace.
Now this brings us to one of the biggest challenges for the new South Africa. How on earth do you heal a nation that's been so deeply wounded? A huge part of their answer was something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And its goal was really controversial. It wasn't primarily about punishment, but about uncovering the full truth of what happened. The idea was that public acknowledgement, just getting it all out in the open, was the only way to even begin to think about reconciliation.
So why does all this history still matter so much now? Well, because the strategies used to fight apartheid, everything from the resistance inside the country to the pressure from outside, created this powerful blueprint for other justice movements all around the world.
For example, the source material we looked at points out how some activists see a direct parallel to a modern conflict. This quote here is from Omar al-Barghouti, a founder of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. He explicitly references the South African model as an inspiration, which shows how the language and the tactics of that anti-apartheid struggle are being used in new contexts today.
And that really leaves us with a final massive question. It's one that South Africa wrestled with and that nations all over the world continue to face. After decades of profound injustice, what's the right way forward? How do you possibly balance that deep human need for reconciliation with the powerful, understandable call for retribution? It's a question with no easy answer, and it remains at the very heart of struggles for justice everywhere.